Hi guys, Tip here. So today we are reading Chapter 8 of Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan. Sometime late in the afternoon, Holt finally ran out of jobs for Will. He looked around the cabin, noting the gleaming kitchen appliances, the spotless fire, the thoroughly swept floor, and totally dust-free rug. A sack of firewood lay beside the fireplace, and another stack, cut and split into shorter lengths, filled the wicker basket beside the kitchen stove. Not bad, he said. Not bad at all. Will felt a surge of pleasure at the sparing praise, but before he could feel too pleased with himself, Holt added, "Can you cook, boy?" "Cook, sir?" Will asked uncertainly. Holt raised his eyes to some unseen superior being. Why do young people invariably answer a question with another question? He asked. Then, receiving no reply, he continued. Yes, cook, prepare food, so that one might eat it. Make meals. I assume you know what food is, what meals are. Yes, Will answered, careful to take any question inflections out of the word. Well, as I told you this morning, this is no grand castle. If we want to eat food here, we have to cook food here, Cole told him. There was that we word again, Hull thought. Every time so far that Hull has said we must, in his it seemed to translate to mean you must. I can't cook, Will admitted, and Hull clapped his hands and rubbed them together. Of course you can't. Most boys can't, so I'll have to show you. Ow, come on. He led the way to the kitchen and introduced Will to the mysteries of cooking, peeling and chopping onions, choosing a piece of meat from the meat safe, trimming it and cutting into neat cubes, then chopping vegetables, searing the beef in a sizzling pan, and then finally adding a generous dish of red wine and some of what Holt called his secret ingredients. The result was a savory smelling stew simmering on the top of the stove. Now, as they waited for well, dinner to be ready, they sat on the the ventral. If you guys know how to say that, I put it in the comments down below so I can read it right. In the early evening, and talked quietly. The Rangers were founded over 150 years ago in King Albert's reign. Do you know about him? Anything about him? Holt looked sideways at the boy sitting beside him, tossing the question out quickly to see his response. Will hesitated. He vaguely remembered the name from the history lesson in the ward, but he couldn't remember any details. Still, he decided he'd try to bluff his way through it. He didn't want to look ignorant on his first day with his new master. "Oh, yes," he said. "King Habert. We learned about him." "Really?" said the ranger expensively. "Perhaps you could tell me a little about him." He leaned back and crossed his legs, getting himself comfortable. Will cast about desperately in his memory, trying to remember even a shred of detail about King Halbert. He'd done something, but what? He hesitated, pretending to gather his thought. The king? That much he was sure of, and he glanced at Holt to see if he could stop now. Holt merely smiled and rolled a gesture with his hand that meant to go on. He was the king 150 years ago, Will said, trying to sound certain of his facts, and Ranger smiled at him, gesturing for him to continue yet again. Well, I seem to recall that he was the one who founded the Ranger Corps, he said helpfully, and Holt raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. Really? You recall that, do you? He said, and Will had a horrible moment where he realized that Holt had merely said Rangers were founded during his reign, not necessarily by him. Well, when I say he founded the Rangers, I mean he was the king when the Ranger Corps was founded, he said. 150 years ago, Holt prompted, and Will nodded expectantly. That's right. Well, that remarks, seeing how I just told you those facts a minute or so ago, the ranger said, his eyebrows coming down like a thunderclouds over his eyes. Will thought it might be better if he just said nothing. Finally, the ranger said in a mild tone, But if you don't know something, don't try to bluff your way out through it. Simply tell me, I don't know. Is that clear? Yes, Holt. Will said, eyes downcast. There was silence for then he said, Holt? Yes, about King Albert, I don't really know. Will admitted, and the ranger made a small snorting gesture. Well, I never would have guessed, he said. But I'm sure you'll remember when I tell you that he was the one who drove the northern clans back over the border into the highlands. And of course, the moment he mentioned it, Will remembered King Albert, known as the father of modern Eldrin. He he had bound the 50 fiefs together in a powerful union to defeat the northern clans. Will could see a way to regain a little credit to Holt's eyes now if you mentioned the father of Eldrin title. Maybe the ranger would. He's sometimes known as the father of modern Eldrin. Holt was saying. He's Holt was saying, and Will realized he left it too late. He created the union between the 50 fiefs that still are structured today. I sort of remember that now, he put in. He thought the addition of sort or of helped it sound as if he wasn't just being wise after the event. Holt looked at him, one eyebrow raised, then continued. Eyebrow raised, then continued. At the time, Halbert felt that he remained safe. The kingdom needed an affection. Felt that to remain safe, the kingdom needed an efficient intelligence force. Intelligence force, said Will, not intelligent. Intelligence. Also, it does help if your intelligence force is also intelligent. Intelligence is knowledge of your enemies, or your potential enemies are up to, what they're planning, what they're thinking. If you know that sort of thing in in advance, you can usually come up with a plan to stop them. That's why he founded the Rangers. He kept the kingdom informed to act as the eyes and the ears of the kingdom. How do you do that? Will asked. His interest rose now. Holt noted the change in tone and momentary gleam of approval touched his eyes. We keep our eyes and ears open. We patrol the kingdom and beyond. We listen, we observe, and we report back. Will nodded to himself, thinking. Then he asked, "Is that the reason why you can make yourselves invisible?" Again, the ranger felt a moment of approval and satisfaction, but he made sure that the boy didn't notice. "We can't make ourselves invisible," he said. "People just think we can. What we do is make ourselves very hard to see. It takes years of learning and practice to do it properly. But you already have some skill required." Will looked up surprised. "I do? When you crossed the yard last night, you used the shadows of the movement and the movement of the wind to conceal yourself, didn't you?" Will nodded yes. He's never met anyone else before who actually understood the skill for moving without being seen. Will continued. "We use the same principles to blend into the background, to use it to conceal us, to become part of it. "I see," said Will slowly. "The trick is to make sure that nobody else does," Holt told him. For a moment Will thought the ranger made a joke, but when he looked up, Holt was as grim-faced as ever. "How many rangers are there?" he asked. Holt and the Brandon had referred more than once to the ranger corps, but Will had only ever seen one, and that was Holt. King Albert established the corps at 50, one for each of the 50 fiefdoms. I'm based here, my colleagues are based at the other 49 castles throughout the kingdom. In addition to providing intelligence about potential enemies, rangers are the law keepers," said Holt. "We patrol the fiefdom as assigned to us, and make sure the laws are obeyed." "I thought Brandon Aldrin did that," Will put in. Holt shook his head. "The Brandon is a judge," he said. "People bring their complaints to him so he can settle them. Rangers enforce the law. We take the law out to people. If a crime has been committed, we look for evidence. We're particularly suited to that role since people don't realize we're around. We investigate to see who's responsible." What happens then? Will asked. Will gave a small shrug. Sometimes we report back to the Brandon of the thief and we'll have the person arrested and charged. Sometimes it's a matter of urgencies. We just deal with it. What do we do? Will asked before he could stop himself. Holt gave himself a long, considering look. Not too much, if we were only been an apprentice for a few hours. He replied, those of us who've been rangers for 20 years or more tend to know what we to do without asking. Oh, said Will, suitably chastened. Holt continued, then in times of war we act as special troops, guiding the armies, scouting before them, going behind the enemy lines to cause the enemy grief, and so on. He glanced down at the boy. It's a bit more exciting than working on a farm. Will nodded. Perhaps the life of a ranger was going to have its appeals after all. What sort of enemies? He asked. After all, Castle Redmount had been at peace for as long as he could remember. Enemies from within and without. Will told him people like the Scandian Sea Raiders or Mythagra and his wargles. Will shivered, recalling some of the more Ludrian stories about Mythagra, the lord of the mountains of rain and night. Holt nodded somberly as he saw Will's reaction. Yes, he said, Mythagra and his wargles are definitely people to be worried about. That's why the rangers keep an eye on them. We like to know if they're gathering, if they're getting ready for war. Still, said Will, as much to reassure himself as for any other reason. The last time they attacked the Brandon's armies made mice meat out of them. That's true, Holt agreed, but only because they had been warned of the attack. He paused and looked meaningfully at Will. By a ranger? The boy asked. Correct. It was a ranger who brought the word that Mythagra wargulls were on their way, then led the cavalry across a secret ford so that they could flank the enemy. It was a great victory, Will said. It certainly was, all due to rangers' alertness and skill, and knowledge of the backtracks of secret paths. My father died in that battle, Will added in a quieter voice, and Holt cast a curious look at him. Is that so? He said. He was a hero, a mighty knight, Will continued. The ranger paused, almost as if he was deciding whether to say something or not. Then he simply replied, I wasn't aware of that. Will was conscious of the sense of disappointment. For a moment he had a feeling that Holt knew something about his father, that he could tell him the story of his heroic death. He shrugged himself. That's why I was so keen to go to Baskel, he said finally, to follow his footsteps. You've got other talents, Holt told him, and will remember the Brand saying much the same thing to him the previous night. Holt, he said. The ranger nodded for him to continue. I was sort of wondering. The Brand said you chose me. Holt nodded again, saying nothing. And both of you say I have other qualities. Qualities that make me suitable to be a ranger's apprentice. That's right, Holt said. Well, what are they? The ranger leaned back, linking his hands behind his head. You're agile. That's good in a ranger, he began. And as we've discussed, you can move quietly. That's very important. You're fast on your feet and you're inquisitive. Inquisitive, how do you mean? Asked Will. Holt looked at him sternly, always asking questions, always wanting to know answers, he explained. That was why I had Brennan test you with that piece of paper. But when did you first notice me? I mean, when did you first think of selecting me? Will wanted to know. Oh, said Will, I suppose it was when I watched you steal those cakes from Master Chubb's kitchen. Will's jaw dropped open in amazement. You watched me? But that was ages ago, he had a sudden thought. Where were you? In the kitchen. You were too busy to notice me when you came in. Will shook his head in wonder. He had been sure that there was nobody in the kitchen. Then he remembered once again how Holt, wrapped in his cloak, could become virtually invisible. There was more to being a ranger, he realized, than how to cook and clean. I was impressed with your skill, said Holt, but there was one thing that impressed me far more. What was that? asked Will. Later, when Master Chubb questioned you, I saw you hesitate. You were going to deny having stolen the cakes. Then I saw you admit it, remember? He hit you on the head with that wooden spoon. Will grinned and rubbed his head together. He could still hear the crack made by the spoon hitting his head. I wonder if I shouldn't have lied, he admitted. I wondered if I should have lied, he admitted. Bolt shook his head very slowly. Oh no, Will, if you lied, you would never have become my apprentice. He stood up and stretched, turning to go indoors to shoes simmering on the stove. Now, let's eat, he said. Well, guys, that's chapter 8 of Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe if you want more, and see you guys next chapter. Bye. Tip out.